Hi, I'm Gary Gibson. Today I'm going to read 3 philosophical essays. They're informal. It should take about 15 minutes. 3 philosophical essays. The Moral Authority of Hitler and Cain. In a recent interview, Vice Presidential candidate Tim Kaine said that people can make their own moral decisions. So did Adolf Hitler on his own moral authority. The idea that evil actions are moral actions rather than immoral actions require an oxymoronic regard negating the moral paradigm, lest one assume that every decision is a moral one. Moral decisions are bracketed by a universe of immoral decisions. Morality is not set individually any more than language is created individually. It's a social phenomenon. Morality is a description of what people of a society actually do. If their effects are fundamentally and preponderantly immoral, then the society can be said to be an immoral one. People have the choice of obeying or not. Social morality and moral norms. Marcus Tullius Cicero wrote a treatise on natural law. He believed that nature itself has an implicit morality, wherein moral people must cohere. Cicero provided an example of the unnatural death of youth being wrong. He might have cited child sacrifice to Moloch as naturally wrong, whereas to Tim Kaine and Adolf Hitler, that would be a personal moral choice. It might be argued that personal moral decisions that do not involve others are in a realm wherein an individual has absolute moral authority. However, decisions that do not involve other people in society at all, even suicide involves others, would not be moral questions. The 10 Commandments are not set individually. One may choose to follow or break the 10 Commandments, yet one cannot create or uncreate the moral authority that provided them. Christians and Jews believe God provided the 10 moral commandments. Tim Kaine might think that the 10 commandments have no moral authority, more so than his own, and that he and each individual should write in effect their own commandments, disregard those of God, and decide if they will or will not break them. If Tim Kaine and society did follow the course of creating and structuring their own moral authority exclusively, it might be said that society was in a state of moral anarchy. When the Bible says thou shalt not kill, one cannot make a moral decision or judgment of the commandment with personal authority. It is possible only to make an ethical decision to obey or disregard the commandment as applicable to oneself. Moral norms are empirical facts describing concatenated mass social behavior. Individuals may use their own ethics that are decisive in following or breaking moral norms for whatever reason. However, the moral paradigm is socially constructed or evolved, provided by divine providence, etc. I believe that in this age of fracture, the destruction of conventional moral norms by Democrat and corporate party leadership is basically motivated to provide no resistance to the accumulation of wealth and power by 1% of the populace globally. People like Colin Kaepernick of the 49ers will talk about social inequality and protest it as a member of the 1%, leading blacks to believe that President Obama's taking up the Bush-era 2 tax cuts, the greatest tax cuts for the rich perhaps in American history, was anything other than pure racism. Inequality based on race is simply un-American, yet you can't correct social inequality of financial matters without using objective mathematical criteria on a class basis that is not racist but applies to everyone equally, including Colin Kaepernick. With the doped up in social order, corrupt leadership would be more at home. When the environment breaks down too far, overpopulation or rebellion challenges the elite's position, and a moral social order would provide less resistance to their mass destruction by elites that would a priori be a logical goal of a post-apocalyptic New World Order. That was Essay 1. I'll see if I can't find Essay 2 here. The Renormalization of Ontology. Sometime around the middle of the 20th century, the field of philosophy called ontology began to experience a change. Ontology is the study of being in the largest sense. More than a scientific analysis such as Aristotle got started, ontology is a way of considering the entire phenomena of existing and being aware of existing. For millennia, a philosophy of existence and ontology was necessarily phenomenal. The 20th century philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre wrote an epic tome called Being and Nothingness during the Second World War that epitomizes a conscious phenomenal epistemology inclusive of ontology. Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, is simultaneously an ontological and epistemological phenomenality. In ancient Sumer, atop the ziggurats, there were great dressed-up dolls portraying Babylonian gods that were moved around by a priesthood for the benefit of the masses below, who could look up and observe a great play explaining the mechanics of ontology, or being. I suppose in a way that might be comparable to NFL football on TV. That mechanics differed from that of an ontological phenomenalism. A mechanics for being is today named physics rather than philosophy. Cosmology around the time of Sartre's composition of Being and Nothingness was moving towards its modern phase. They're not quite there yet. From Lemaitre's interpretation of Einstein's general theory of relativity, the concept of the Big Bang or inflation of a universe from a singularity arose. Late in the 20th century, physical cosmology surpassed ontological phenomenalism as the fundamental theory of being. Not that Sartre's subjectivist approach to ontology is wrong. It is simply limited to a place within cosmological ontology. People in science regard the mind and its place in nature as fitting within a steady-state field, not one like Fred Hoyle's steady state, wherein exists everything in the universe. That field is often thought to be the Higgs field, named for Peter Higgs, a field that provides every particle wave with mass. Where the perturbations flowing through the field arose from, to start with, is challenging to say. The field itself is, I think, through thought to be expansionist itself from a singularity. With all the great physical theory based on and often confirmed by observation of phenomenalist epistemology is severely challenged to get attention, some physicists believe philosophy and ontology haven't kept up with cosmology and science. Of course, some neurologists and psychiatrists also believe that their study of the brain and human behavior have transcended a phenomenal epistemology like that of Sartre. Reductionism explaining away the holistic experience of mind and being within a universal Higgs field. For some time in history, spanning a few thousand years, theological approaches to ontology were preeminent over physical and cosmological approaches. With evolution theory and later Big Bang cosmology, and even later the Hubble Space Telescope and microwave telescopes able to observe the pattern of the background of micro radiation of the universe, left over from the era less than 400,000 years after the Big Bang, when the universe cooled down enough to let electrons escape, there were two great theories that seemed to oppose, at least initially, theological paradigms about the universe. So at the end of the 20th century, theology and ontology were to some prima facie obsolete. While work had gone into science, less so did modernization after reflection arise in theology and philosophy, philosophical ontology based on phenomenal approaches. Obviously, some ontologists, like that of Bishop Berkeley's idealism, was not able to be refuted technically. Berkeley's arguments remained valid, as did Sartre's, even as reductionists challenged each part simply because of the recursive nature of arguments and responses. In fact, entire scientific cosmologies arose that took up a phenomenal approach to mechanics with the innovation of cosmological holography theory in higher dimensional spaces. The Bible book of Genesis itself may be taken in more than one way, and is amenable to modern interpretations permissive of relativistic time paradigms, even as theologians may interpret God's omnipotent and omniscient potential as encompassing a level 4 multiverse, or Max Tegmark, wherein everything is actually static and pre-existing, while human minds journey through it and an infinite number of universes, actually branching and switching to different universes with each new individual thought, though unaware of it. Assumptions about the Bible and the nature of God tend to restrict the possible ways of interpreting the book of Genesis, though theologians readily stipulate the absolute omnipotent power of God. Jesus Christ's reference to God having many mansions could refer, for instance, as well to an infinite multiverse as well as apartments or buildings in one metaphysical realm. As philosophy and science were apparently briefly surpassed by modern scientific cosmology in the field of ontology, at least, remarkably within a generation, science itself provided the tools to renormalize each as fields of study consistent with the Bible and or ontological phenomenalism. With all due respect to Edmund Husserl and his logical investigations, though I'm not referring to his works. And then I have a third essay that regards multiverse theory and space expansion, dark energy, a $64 billion a year question. Space membranes may have irregular shapes that, when intersecting, provide irregular rates of apparent time passage. They may apparently have regular shapes that, when intersecting or passing through membranes, provide an apparent smooth rate of expansion of space-time resembling that of dark energy. Dark energy is regarded preponderantly as responsible for the increasing rate of expansion of the space of the observable universe. Cosmologists think the rate of expansion of space and time will continue until a big rip occurs, when the universe is 64 billion years old, whereat it will cease to exist, failing to draw Social Security benefits itself from an economics expanded with Federal Reserve zero-interest loans. Membranes capable of being an entire universe, when intersecting at various angles or portions, contacting, must be of very large size, one would think. Size is relative, though. In a completely empty void, a 1-inch membrane might as well be a mile wide. Only in relation to other membranes or things could comparative quantifications occur. If a membrane is not of zero dimension, simultaneously existing yet not existing, logically somewhat absurd, except perhaps for quanta in some form of superposition, membranes and superpositions, even with a timeless eternal form, then it must be made of something. In a field, particles arose of various sizes as energy wave packets. A membrane, though, is regarded as some kind of fundamental entity without parts. Irreducible membranes of one dimension even seem less probable than superposition, zero-dimensional membranes that take one dimension with interference, observational waveform, collapse, or simply the Word of God. To begin, a membrane of n dimensions may be a quantified field in the mind of God, initially structured in the spiritual sense, that with interference and intersections collapses from the superpositions of the mind of God into one-dimensional and concatenated dimensional forms. Recombinant dimensional membranes, perhaps with an unknown form of charge, perhaps multitensional charges, could be built up superdimensions with greater magnitudes than other membranes. The shape of the universe, spatially speaking, was and probably is of interest to cosmologists. It could have been toroidal, spherical, etc. Perhaps there is no clearly definable shape for a universe at the leading expanding edges, whereat it fades off into a nothingness emptier than nothing itself. It may simply be an apparent universe with apparent yet not real space that is instead a concatenated and apparent effect for observers from one-dimensional membranes moving through one another. When one membrane passes along the axis of another, it may appear as an acceleration of spatial expansion to local observers. Any sort of turn or deflection for a membrane shape would require some irregularity of force acting at that place. The presence or absence of planar deformation or of spherical deformation, if a singularity, indicates the presence of a heterodox field or membrane element. Maybe some theorists regard individuated endowments of force as fundamental branes, with the optimal shape for a brain corresponding to the configuration of dimensions in which it coheres. Dimensional branes thus appear to be theoretically embedded within a Chinese puzzle box of additional dimensional branes. In evolutionary biology, there is an argument that mutation is the primary agent for change rather than natural selection. Mutation, though, is a way of saying change of an individual from an existing pattern, or common average. The capacity for mutability is an implicit aspect of being. God may be changeless and eternal, yet space-time beings change continuously, in a continuum of change. Mutation, however, is regarded as occurring to living beings rather than to inanimate molecular forms. Complexity in biological forms allows for a suggestion of mutation from an existing pattern, whereas for geological formations, talus slopes, for example, are said to evolve under the influence of the second law of thermodynamics and entropy with the increase of disorder. Can dimensional membranes be thought of as mutable, or are they just too simple to be even considered to evolve? Relationships of membranes that change in a field of all possible membranes existing might be regarded as evolving. Evolution occurs in the space-time changes for observers living in a nexus of intersecting membranes. For God hosting the membrane field, nothing changes in the sense. The membrane's position and motion follow his will. Intellect of observers changes too, yet as in a level 4 multiverse, intellect is an apparent phenomena embedded in the interacting intersecting membrane fields. It is predetermined, though, able apparently to modify energy-matter forms in a small way within a space-time manifold. God configured the complete field from eternity with space-time membranes comprising contingent ontology for others. And that was the end of the 3 essays.